Yeah. Okay. Cool. It's that time again. I think we're gonna talk about. I'll say just to you, the VOD people out there. Sometimes I fear that doing things like this, when I don't have an audience of thousands or whatever, is just me role playing as if I'm my favorite content creators. Now, what I'm actually going to ramble about. So, I entitled this thing Two Vital GM Mistakes. And here they are. The first one that I'm thinking about is a sermon that I've given in public before, but now I will give to video. And that is when you run your own tabletop campaign. And let's be real, your own D&D campaign, because it's the world's only role-playing game after all. Assuming that a campaign goes from level 1 to level 20. Particularly that last part. Since 20 is the last level, there's an assumption that, well, you go to level 20 in a campaign because that's the last level. And that's a reasonable thing to think, but that's just a bad idea, I find. In fact, I think it's a terrible idea. And that's because I think that most stories that GMs come up with do not fit in a 1 to 20 game. And I don't think you would really know that unless you had already played or you had heard someone else say this. Because you think, oh, I'm going to run a fantasy campaign, and the boss is going to be a dragon. Okay, then your campaign is going to have to end around like level 8. Dragons are not, like, dragons are big and powerful, but dragons are not like a sufficient final boss, material. They're not sufficient final boss material if your characters are, I would argue, in 5th edition, like level 9 or 10. It becomes, oh, this is kind of dangerous, instead of, oh, this is actually a climactic end boss. If you go, well, the main villain, the last final boss of my campaign is a lich, okay, then your campaign's going to end at like level 11, 12. If you get your character, if the players have to reach level 20 before they fight this lich, they're going to annihilate him. People complain all the time about, oh, high level D&D is difficult to run because you have to design for all these things that the players can do, and the players' characters are too strong and they can do too much. And that does make it a lot harder. But I would also argue that the story, I think I've talked about this before, but in a different vein. I've complained before about how we don't have good pop culture representations of what high level play is, and so we go back to the mines. We go back to the mines. We go back to the Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings, and like, nope, that's not level 20 or even 15, probably, unless you get into some of the lore bits. But like, for what we see and what the common person understands, no. The powerhouse has a few powerful spells. That is not high level play. No, it's just not. Though, side tangent, once upon a time, because I'm not immune to thinking myself cool and my points important, evidently, I proclaimed in some relevant thread somewhere, a big problem with high level play is that we don't have a good pop culture reference point for high level play, the same way that we have The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings for lower level play. And then somebody else commented back to me, yeah, we do. Comics and anime have people that can devastate planets in a single punch, and people love that. So you're wrong. Superhero movies and anime totally prove you wrong on that. And because it was the first time I had encountered that kind of pushback, I stopped. I was like, oh, is this true? And it's only later that I realized, actually, no, that person is super wrong. And they're super wrong because in things like anime and superhero movies, they typically try to scale everything down. In fact, I find it very frustrating when I'm watching a superhero movie and they have a literal wizard in there, and the wizard's big, powerful thing is, I'm going to make a bunch of copies of myself, and then they're all going to make magic lashes that tie up the enemy. And it's like, are you kidding me, man? That's like, hmm. Anyway, I and it really disappoints me when that happens because, like, dude, that's not a high level. That's like mid level. What are you talking about? I'm frequently frustrated at how characters aren't allowed to be truly strong, and concepts that to me are relatively minor are treated as like big deals. And shonen anime is even worse about this. Shonen anime, and admittedly, I haven't really kept up with like the new stuff. So I could be wrong. I tried twice to get into Jujutsu Kaisen and just couldn't do it. And I'm going to try a third time, specifically for Maki. So we'll see how that goes. But in my experience of watching shonen anime, usually in the early game, they introduce all these different kinds of skills and abilities. And then as we go on, they narrow the field. Eventually, the something particles or the something chakra or the something whatever makes irrelevant any kind of other things that might have mattered, which is not to sound cynical, but is an easy way to keep the story simple when you're not interested in thinking about how different abilities and powers interact with one another, which precisely makes it a bad representation of high level play in D&D. High level play in D&D is not you do a bunch of damage, though it is also that. Like any shonen anime that gets late game, all of a sudden there's this, like I said, there's like a narrowing of what matters or counts. Dragon Ball Z, actually, Dragon Ball, early Dragon Ball, you could have someone who had a gimmick like, ooh, I have an illusion that I project. How will you find me, Goku? Or, ooh, I'm poison. My body is poison. How will you defeat me without touching me, Goku? You could have like little gimmicky stuff like that, and not even gimmicky. You could just have alternate tactics. But as Dragon Ball Z went on, as Dragon Ball Z happened, because Dragon Ball is where the fun gimmicks were. Okay, I am still audible. You had the alternate tactics and the tricks in Dragon Ball, and then Dragon Ball Z, it just became about numbers. Numbers, numbers, numbers. Can you blast someone with your sheer amount of numbers versus their sheer amount of numbers? Goku never has to deal in Dragon Ball Z or beyond with someone who goes, I cast maze on you. You're stuck in a magic maze. You can't get out until you solve the maze, right? Goku's never asked to make an intelligence save and then get screwed. Goku's never soul caged. He's never, like, that stuff just doesn't happen. Or if it happens, the show just goes, well, if you just power up enough, you can just ignore it. And that's not how that works in D&D, and that's definitely not how it works in general. I can't speak for in general, but D&D especially. So the idea that, oh, there are shonen anime where people power up and punch planets away, so we don't actually. That's a dogshit representation of high level play because it doesn't work. In D&D, you can get a powerful barbarian that can do a ton of damage, but if someone goes, okay, soul cage, idiot, like, and I especially get upset about this kind of thing with magic using characters because they get it the worst in fiction. Magic is usually crunched down to a bunch of inspecific things that are just no match for a good, honest punch. And that just D&D works. It's not how D&D works. That guy was wrong. Side tangent over. First vital GM mistake is not thinking what level your story logically ends at and then shooting for that. You assume that you're going to go 1 to 20, and then the characters hit where they should be at the end of the story or a point that feels like the end, but you have like 5 or 6 levels before you get to 20, maybe even more, maybe like 8. And you go, I guess it's time for some post game DLC, but the game's technically not over yet. Some generic dungeon or mountain or series of quests that's like not super related. You just end up putting filler, for lack of a better term for it, to reach that 20 mark, and you go, okay, now we can conclude. No, man. If the final boss of your campaign is a campaign being levels 1 to 7, and just do that. I have a friend who is honestly more excited. Like, the only thing that he gets excited by when it comes to running a campaign is running a campaign from levels 1 to 20. That's his juice. And I was thinking just this morning, because, you lose steam over the course of a campaign and it's genuinely difficult. I can I can only think of one time I've ever seen a story that logically would take from level 1 to 20 to be effective. And it was the same friend who did it. I was like, he ran a campaign, and the campaign was supposed to be about starting as low level grunts. And ooh, my connection is unstable. Troubling. Well, they are trying to reconnect. Are we even Boo. I don't want to get. I have internet. Why is there a problem? Are you reconnecting? Are you? Oh, it went away, so presumably I'm reconnected now. My friend came up with one idea that was like, okay, in retrospect, that seems like it would work. We started as low level grunts in this like military dominated continent that they were having a war with like another continent. And the idea of the campaign was to gain power and influence, and then have the choice of how to use our power and influence once we had gained it. And we didn't finish, what do you know, but we got to level 16. It's the last 5th edition game he ever ran before he converted hard to Pathfinder. We'll never look back. But we made it to level 16 before like we ended up stopping for reasons that I don't remember. And I remember feeling the effect of looking back from where my character came from to where my character was at the moment at level 16. And I went, this honestly did need all those levels. That's a slow burn story that needs time. And so I think you can I think that works if you want to go 1 to 20 with that. But then there are a lot of he wants to do 1 to 20 every time. And I was thinking this morning, honestly, dude, you might benefit from not doing that, from just running a shorter kind of thing that you can see through. He's run shorter things before. There's a Conan story, like the Tower of the Elephant, that I liked. Matt Colville referenced it. I was like, sounds cool. And I read it, and then it was cool. And then I recommended it to this friend, and he read it, and he thought it was cool. And he made like a short Pathfinder thing that was basic that, and that was good. It was good. I would, and I think that maybe he might try. It says my connection's unstable again. I don't know why that would be. So now it's me vamping until this goes away because I'm not sure if I'm coming through or not. And it went away. I think it might be good for him to try that, to try shorter things. But because his passion is in running big, long campaigns, I'm not sure that I'm going to suggest it because it'd be like someone suggesting to me, hey, maybe you should run something where like money and treasure doesn't actually play a part in it. Like, I'd resist. If it's a suggestion, I'd be open to it, but I'd resist. So I think that's one vital mistake that GMs make. Assuming your campaign will go one to should the characters be when they reach the climax of what you are doing, because spoilers, I think the is typically much lower than 20. Again, if you want a dragon to be the final boss, you should end around like level 8, if you ask me. If you want a lich to be the final boss, you should end around like level 12, if you ask me. And people seem to think, well, if you just staple enough special abilities onto the boss, then you can make it fit at any level. And the answer is yes, until you start forgetting all these complicated abilities or you don't use them right, and then they may as well not even be there. It's just bloated, not good. You should really just run something that occupies the levels that you want to occupy. The second vital GM mistake that people make, and I need to do better with this as well, or I do my best with this, is making a decision or a ruling in the moment rather than going to the books and looking it up. I do this. I make decisions in the moment, and I make rulings in the moment because it slows the game down to go, oh, how does that work? And everybody whips out their phones and books and people are looking it up. The thing is, I still need to work on trying to enforce that because while I make decisions in the moment, when I go, I'm just going to say that it works like this and then we'll move on. I have people who go looking into the books or their phones, even though I've already said how it's going to work. And it's not like they're trying to be rude or anything. They probably think they're being helpful. Oh, I'll look it up anyway. But like, I don't know. I could be firmer with saying, no, stop, don't do that. And I think that definitely an inexperienced GM move is to try looking up rules whenever you run across something that you don't know exactly how it works. You should make a ruling in the moment that makes sense to everybody and then move on rather than fiddling with the book for like 5 or 10 minutes looking for whatever it is or Googling it or whatever. It takes you out of the game, it slows the game down, it's just bad overall. And I think I could work on enforcing that with my players as well. Because if I make a decision and then the players who it's not their turn start looking and rifling through the books for it, that's no good. Those are two mistakes. That was the title. Now on to the campaign diary shit. My game shop game, which is the ones in the big desert pyramid dungeon that I'm in, played last time. I completely forgot while I was talking in the last stream that part of why I was interested to see what happened and how it played out because last time they found the secret entrance that I said I wouldn't include but totally did anyway to the residential area of the Tomb Keeper warrior guys. And I had originally not wanted to play through sessions where they're just kind of slaughtering all these people, like, but I kind of turned around on it. And part of the reason I turned around on it was the like boss of this place that guards the one of the two ways down from here to the next level of the dungeon gets stronger the more of his people you kill. So if people ran amok through here, they could inadvertently make the boss much, much stronger than maybe they would have anticipated. And I think that could be potentially fun and cool. But that did not happen. See, I had if you remember what I said last time, and maybe you didn't, I'm about to say it anyway. Basically, in this residential place, there are going to be more warriors, there are going to be some demon summoning magicians, and there are also going to be some priestesses, including not Ishizu Ishtar from Yu-Gi-Oh! Because that's how I roll. I I had decided that like the high priestess of this place had seen the future, because again, that's how I roll, and was going to try to approach the players and say, hey, if you stop killing everybody, I will show you what you seek. And I will also promise you great power. And I thought that that could feel too contrived. So I basically made an encounter table of different configurations of warriors and priestesses. And one of the things on there had, one of the priestesses is actually not Ishizu, and, it'll happen. And I was going to, I say leave it up to fate or chance, but honestly, if you roll enough times on that, she's going to come up eventually, one would think. Well, she came up immediately. The session before the last one, I left off saying that reinforcements they had just fought a bunch of magicians at the door and their demons, and they had slaughtered through them. And then I had narrated to the monk player who was looking like down this two-way split that there were reinforcements coming from either way. So to open the game that happened last Saturday, I rolled twice on my encounter thing, on my encounter table of Tomb Keeper reinforcements. And I was going to just decide what reinforcements they saw based on that. And one of them was the group that had her in it immediately. I didn't want us to start immediately without combat, so I basically waited until it became the priestess's turn for her to advocate, for not Ishizu to advocate that people stop because, this bloodshed is too much and it's going to wipe us all out, even though her other companions didn't feel the same and were hesitant to enact that. In the meantime, the game plan of reinforcements that were not Ishizu uh, were basically they were going to try to stall the players. Magicians could erect stone walls, and the warriors had like explosive casks that they would throw, and they would strategically crumble the place. And they were basically going to try to funnel them into some trapdoors that were on this level, or like some pit traps that were on this level. And so that was going to be their goal. Shizu has her own goal, but we rolled that thing first. So a bit of fighting happened where they erected the walls and the players dispelled and otherwise broke their way through the walls, because the monk player said we should retreat so they don't flank us. So the players agreed. They did that. And then, since they retreated partway down the hall, the enemies, instead of pursuing them, threw explosives and erected the stone wall to like block them in. The players used their various talents to blast through that. It was then that the high priestess, my not Ishizu, came forward or made herself known. And there's a new ability that immediately made a difference in everything. So, related tangents. One of the players wanted to be a dragon rider, and we did some custom stuff for it. But one of the custom things that I did, because I think they were interested in gem dragons, they might have been. I hope it wasn't just all a me invention. There are stat blocks for gem dragons in MC. And so, for an Emerald Dragon, which is what the Dragon Rider player has, I made a modified version of that stat block that was just like weaker. And then the idea would be as you level up, you get closer to the true stat block, though still slightly modified. But These gem dragons are psychic and they get these psychic powers. And I said, oh, and as you level up, every other level after I think sixth, you get to pick a new psionic power that your dragon learns as they get like better. I did not look at these psionic powers. And this player is eternally asking, hey, is this okay? Hey, are you sure you don't want me to change or switch out this stuff? And because I am a healthy and well adjusted GM, I go, no, it's fine.